Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I'm not a big fan of Himawari having Kurama.
It's everywhere. Like people saying Kurama coming back is just terrible writing. But I still want to see what Tizzy says.
Okay, I'm not a fan of it, and let me explain why. First off, it lessens the impact of Kurama's death and his sacrifice during his fight with Momoshiki. Even if it's a completely new version of Kurama, it'll still lessen the impact of this sacrifice no matter what.
Yeah, not really. That's how good writing works. You see, Kishimoto knew that people really love Kurama and they really love Naruto. And he knows that we want nothing more than for Naruto to come back and be super strong and the same as Sasuke and just get some new power buff, right? Now, if you were around during Jiraiya's death, this is the exact same thing people were saying. That when Kashin Koji came back, it was like downplaying Jiraiya's death, and it made it less meaningful. But what makes this good writing is one, that Jiraiya set the precedent. That after his death and all of these people's deaths, that each generation will then teach the next generation to be better and break the cycle of hate. Because Jiraiya's theory was that with each generation, we would get better and we'll become more peaceful and better people. This is why you end up with Boruto, who's basically just a freaking genius, compared to Naruto, who's arguably still a genius in a way because he learned a lot of the abilities that even Minato had in much shorter time. Let's talk about like the Rasengan as an example. Each generation learned it faster. And just like Gojo's death, like they bought a star and named it Gojo. And now that Gojo's back again, people are mad hype that Utah is inside. And the same thing happened with the return of Kurama. That was like the main talk over anime talk besides, Gojo coming back as well. And the fact that it was already established that these tailed beasts will never die, like their chakra will basically regenerate or respawn or resurrect anywhere, that was heavily established like well in the beginning of Naruto. It would be headcanon or against the writing of the actual verse if Naruto stayed dead, because it was foretold and already spoken about that tailed beasts return.
This kind of retcons what was said in the beginning of the series. We know that Momoshiki has the power to look into the future and see the fates of others. This has already been established time and time again. During Momoshiki's fight with Naruto and Sasuke, Momoshiki looks over at Kurama and says, "It seems you've been burdened with an interesting fate. What a pity, Fox. You possess so much power, yet not the jutsu to pass it down to the next generation." Basically confirming that Kurama was going to die and that his power wouldn't be passed down to the next generation.
And it was pretty obvious that this panel was actually the exact opposite of what you mentioned. That the fox doesn't actually possess the ability to pass down himself. Like he actually has to die in order to pass down his power to the next generation. Because then Momoshiki goes and proceeds to eat Kinshiki. And he's like, this is how my clan does it. So he's demonstrating how each generation is able to give all of their power to the next. And that's how the Asutsuki pass their powers down to each other. So in a way, Momoshiki was foreshadowing the fact that the fox would have to die in order to pass his power down. So this doesn't retcon, this was actually an example of foreshadowing. That we know that Momoshiki foresaw the future and we saw the fox's death. And he pitied Kurama that he didn't have that jutsu to be able to turn, people into a fruit and then pass down his power like that.
Basically confirming that Kurama was going to die and that his power wouldn't be passed down to the next generation.
Now that's one interpretation of the same panels, but as I explained, which turned out to be correct, that this was actually more of a foreshadowing that yes, he would die in order to transfer his power. Like what Momoshiki is explaining here is that while he's alive, he possesses a jutsu that he can just transfer power. But Momoshiki pities the fox because his method of transferring power is much more difficult. In fact, he has to die and come back again. And back in Shippuden, it clearly said that even if you are separated and one day, you will all become one. When the time comes for you to know what true power is. And this is back in Shippuden, we're looking at that baby Kurama. And by the way, the whole process of how the Ninetales re-emerges again was stated in Shippuden. I'll take the Ninetales with me to my death, so that the interval until he emerges again is delivered. So if the Jinchuriki with the Biju dies, the Ninetales will re-emerge again. And that's why out of every single person on TikTok, YouTube, anywhere, I was the only one that came up with this theory where Momoshiki literally said, "Is that your kid?" because he's looking at the fox. And he wasn't speaking to Naruto here. He said, "Is that your kid, fox?" Like question mark, speaking to the fox. Because it's possible that Momoshiki saw his future. And he took pity on Kurama and the fact that he had to die in order to pass down his power. In the same manner that has happened before, that if the Ninetales dies, it'll reemerge again in the form of a child, because they can never truly die. Even if you are separated, and one day you will all become one. In fact, Himawari's coming was prophesied and believed that the bond known as cooperation was true power. So remember when Naruto used Baryon mode, that it was like the peak of cooperation between Jinchuriki and Biju. This is why Himawari makes sense. Because remember how each generation is supposed to be an improvement from the last? This is why in the latest Boruto chapter, Kurama says, "Don't be a spoiled baby, Himawari. The only one who can do something about this is you. I can sense that your chakra has a higher affinity to mine than any of your predecessors, more than even Naruto's. So get rid of any foolish preconceived biases. First off, you need to believe in yourself. Otherwise, your future doesn't look bright either way." And these concepts go all the way back to Shippuden. The fact that each generation is learning jutsu faster and better, and they've got better cooperation. Like if you watch Boruto the anime, the way they resolve their problems is a lot less childish than Naruto as a kid and Sakura as a kid. Like in the first 20 episodes of Naruto, you mostly just see Sakura crying. But in Boruto, they're very wholesome and they support each other. And to top it off, it says here, "I see, it seems you're burdened with a rather interesting fate. What a pity, Fox." This is just all peak foreshadowing, and people are calling this like an A pull, like just pulled out of their bum. Specifically, people on Twitter. Now, Daemon said that Boruto was far too weak at the strength level that he was there. And that there just isn't anyone on his level, that there's no decent fighters in the entire village. And Jura was looking for the Ninetales. Didn't care about anyone else in the entire village. They just wanted Uzumaki Naruto's chakra, to which they were surprised to find Himawari instead. Not only that, a lot of weird Boruto fans were like, "Oh, I think Daemon is into Himawari." Is one way that you can interpret what was that intensity from Daemon, like the way he's looking at her, right? What was that intensity that I felt from her just now? But in clarification and full context, then he goes on to continue, "She does seem weak from up close. But why didn't you dodge it? It should be easy for the likes of you." In other words, Daemon was afraid of Himawari and nobody else in the village. So if Himawari's affinity, in other words cooperation, is better than any of her predecessors, and that if they were all to become one, when the time comes for you to know what true power is, this is why Kurama strongly believes that the only one who can do something about this is not Naruto, is not Boruto, but Himawari, because she specifically, somehow, has a better affinity. Not to mention that Boruto is Osutsuki, so it's highly likely that his DNA was basically erased, including any chakra from the Ninetales, if that he was supposed to have inherited some. So that's why, in my opinion, narratively, it makes sense. It's been foreshadowed, it's been hinted, they've dropped bombs. Favorite verse. So let's dive into why she potentially could be one of the strongest in the Boruto and Naruto franchise. Now we are seeing why. I mean, come on, Himawari, as a child, one-shotted adult Naruto. That's insane. And now... So yeah, it's like, if you were a Naruto fan and you'd been keeping track of the series basically for its entirety, it's a no-brainer that Kurama was going to come back. And no, his death never could be diminished because he doesn't really die. This was established well back in Shippuden, so I'd say the only people that are still claiming that it makes no sense didn't actually read the show properly, never made it to the end of this video, and just get their information from TikTok.